This is war. War and its masses. War and its men. War and its machines. Together they form the big picture.
Welcome to the Big Picture. I'm Captain Carl Zimmerman. The Big Picture is a report to you from your Army. An Army committed by you, the people of the United States, to stop communist aggression wherever it may strike. The Big Picture traces the course of events in the Korean campaign through first-hand reports from our combat veterans and through film taken by combat cameramen of the Army Signal Corps. These are the men who daily record on film the big picture as it happens, where it happens. Today, our big picture brings into focus the Army's 7th Infantry Division. You'll see that division's advance to the Yalu River, our troops celebrating Thanksgiving Day along the Manchurian border, and the great evacuation at Hungnam. You'll hear a first-hand report from Sergeant Charles Dumas, combat correspondent of the 7th. And now, let's go back to November 1950.
On 20 November, United Nations forces are advancing everywhere in North Korea and have reached the Manchurian border at Haisan-jin, as Chinese Reds, who entered the fighting 3 weeks previously, have suddenly withdrawn. On 24 November, General Douglas MacArthur launches a major assault in the western sector in a movement designed to end the war in Korea, barring full-scale intervention by the Chinese Communists. By 28 November, the Chinese Communists have again entered the fighting in far greater force than they did a month previously. This halts the UN general assault and drives UN troops back, especially on the right flank of the western line, where South Korean resistance is crumbling. By 4 December, Chinese Communists have driven a wedge between the U.S. 8th Army in the west and the 10th Corps in the east, with the 8th Army retreating toward Pyongyang and part of the 10th Corps fighting its way out of a trap near the Changjin Reservoir. By 20 December, Chinese Communists and regrouped North Koreans have driven UN forces to the 38th parallel in the west. In the east, U.S. Marines and 7th Division troops have fought their way out of the red trap and are being evacuated by ship at Hungnam, with other UN troops fighting bitterly to hold the perimeter until the evacuation is completed. After the tanks have spearheaded through to the border near Haisan-jin, the men of the U.S. 7th Division come in to take over. It is bitter cold in the valleys as they advance doggedly across the snow patches. It is even colder as they ascend the slopes, and it is tougher going up. Frozen ground offers little in the way of footholds. Fortunately, there is not much opposition from the enemy. Our planes help take care of that. One good thing, they are advancing. It is a tough, climbing job, but they are going forward. Slowly but steadily, they are coming closer and closer to their objective, the south bank of the Yalu River on the Manchurian border. At this time, it appears that reaching the border will be the beginning of the end of the war in Korea, and the men are anxious to get to their objective. Finally, they see it stretching out in front of them, the Yalu River, frozen over completely, and the Korean town of Haisan-jin, nestling in the snow-patched valley.
The Yalu River. Up to now, our troops knew it only from their maps, but at last they had reached the banks of this river that form the borderline between North Korea and Manchuria. Now we want you to meet Sergeant Charles Dumas, combat correspondent of the 7th Division. Well, Chuck, you're pretty proud of this 7th Division, aren't you?
Well, as a matter of fact, Captain, I am. You see, the 7th Division did make a couple of records over there in Korea. when we first entered the campaign, we made an amphibious landing at Incheon on the west coast. And only, less than 45 days later, the division made another amphibious landing, this time on the east coast, high up on the north east coast near the Manchurian border. And that's when we started our campaign to the border.
Well, the 7th Division was the only division that reached the Manchurian border, isn't that right?
That's right. We were the only division to reach the Yalu River.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us about that advance up there, Chuck.
Well, it started with the amphibious landing at Iwan late in October. When we went ashore, it was chilly, autumn weather. We advanced over the mountains on foot, in vehicle, led by tanks most of the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the cold really started to set in. It was only November, but it was pretty cold up there.
Well, how about winter clothing, Chuck? Were you prepared for this?
Well, yes, we were. I've got a lot of letters from home. Some of the folks thought I wasn't clothed warmly enough. But we did have most of the things we needed. Parkas, shoe packs, pile liners, hoods. We were pretty well bundled up and pretty comfortable, too.
Did you say comfortable, Chuck?
Well, as comfortable as you can be at 22 degrees below zero.
Well, Chuck, tell us a little about this terrain that you met going up to the Yalu.
Well, Captain, it was winding mountains, mountain trails. That's the way we traveled. There were plenty of mountains, plenty of snow, plenty of cliffs to climb. It was what we call rugged terrain, and I mean rugged.
Mm-hmm. How about your air support during this battle?
Well, air support came in the form of fighter planes. There were a few bombing missions flown. The town of Kapsan was plastered several times. As a matter of fact, it was almost leveled. The air support was good and timely.
When you asked for it, it was there, right?
It was there, and matter of fact, it saved one whole company from ambush, from being wiped out.
Well, that sounds like you needed some air supply here and there, Chuck. Did you?
Well, air supply, yes, because you see these truck convoys coming over these mountain roads. There was ice, and they'd slip and slide. We'd lose some of them. They were slow. The Air Force flew in these big C-54s and dropped us food, clothes, ammunition.
Can you give us an idea, Chuck, of what the opposition was like?
Well, the opposition seemed to decrease as we advanced. The enemy was fighting a rear guard action. They weren't putting up a real battle. A couple of places they paused to turn around like the cornered rat, as he will fight when he's cornered. They threw a lot of mortars at us, sniper fire, but as we moved up, passed through Kapsan, led by tanks, the infantry swept right through the opposition, and we made it to the border.
And what date was that when you arrived at the border?
Well, it was the 21st of November, just 3 days before Thanksgiving.
Well, while the folks back home were enjoying their Thanksgiving dinner, what was the 7th Division doing?
Well, we were eating our Thanksgiving dinner, too.
You mean a hot meal, Chuck?
A hot meal, as a matter of fact, turkey.
Right in the line, at the front line.
Well, yes. You see, they brought these turkeys up from the quartermaster about 100 miles through the rear, and those were truck convoy runs.
Mm-hmm.
They ran them through all night. They got there to the 17th Regiment on the front lines at about 3 a.m. in the morning, and the next afternoon we had turkey on the Yalu River.
Well, that makes these cooks pretty remarkable gents, doesn't it?
Well, yes, they did quite a good job up there. I think every man in the division had his Thanksgiving turkey that day. And, we'd been eating hot meals regularly right along. I know a lot of World War II veterans will wonder about that, but the frontline troops did have the hot meals right there in the foxhole.
That's good to know, Chuck. Well, just how cold was it at this time?
Well, by the time we reached the Yalu River line, we'd progressed that much farther north, and it was really cold. As I said before, it was 22 below at noon. That was the average. It did dip lower. The Yalu River was completely frozen over, and most people have a picture of it as a wide, running, raging river. Well, in the wintertime, in November anyhow, it was just a thin frozen stream. You could see right across into Manchuria. It was very cold and sharp.
Well, let's watch the 7th Division now, Chuck, as they celebrate Thanksgiving on the Yellow River.
Giving dinner, turkey with all the trimmings, and served piping hot is a pleasant interlude. It brings a touch of home to the icy wastes of Korea. The machine gun crews crouched in the outposts overlooking the vast icy stretch of the Yalu River are not forgotten. The mess sergeant brings Thanksgiving to them, too. Hot chow that hits the right spot when it's so cold. With turkey and mashed potatoes in extra large portions. But Thanksgiving peace doesn't last long. The Chinese hordes attack suddenly, crossing the ice on the Yalu in ever-increasing numbers. Many of them surrender. At the Changjin Reservoir, the men of the 1st Marine Division and the 7th Infantry Division find themselves trapped by 10 communist divisions. That's when the withdrawal is ordered. Retreat? Hell, snapped one Marine commander. We're not retreating, we're just advancing in a different direction. Orders are issued for all the troops to assemble at Hagaru. This time their objective is to break through and reach Hungnam on the coast 60 miles away. Through howling winds and icy blasts of snow, preparations are made for an orderly withdrawal. Back across the frozen valleys, which they had fought so hard to capture. It was tough enough when they were advancing. It was far worse to have to pull back. They are already tired, cold, and weary as they move into the assembly area, but they know they will fight their way out of the trap. Even the heaviest of armor and tanks are to be taken back. There are casualties as much from the cold as from snipers' bullets. The wounded are carried along. The dead are buried. But the assembly for the withdrawal continues unabated. Food and supplies are airdropped from C-47s and C-119s by the 21st Troop Carrier Squadron of the Combat Cargo Command. Ammunition, medical supplies, and food are dropped. No matter how cold and tired they may feel on the ground, the sight of these cargo planes dropping their parachute loads from the skies gives the men a sense of not being forgotten, a feeling that they are still part of a vast team, fighting together. Meanwhile, preparations for the long, hazardous move progress. All excess equipment is burned or destroyed. They make sure that nothing will be left that the enemy can make use of. Trucks, jeeps, everything and anything that is mobile that can move under its own power is saved. The enemy will find, when they take over, only ruined earth and charred remains. Thousands of battle casualties and frostbite victims are evacuated from the emergency fields at Hagaru and Koto and flown here to the Yonpo airfield near Hungnam, where they are transferred to hospital planes for the trip to Japan. They will soon find themselves warm and well cared for. Many of these men suffered their wounds during the withdrawal from the Changjin Reservoir, but none were left behind to the communists. Those still fighting along the snow-covered passes of the North Korean mountains face a tough battle before they can reach the comparative safety of Hungnam. With only short pauses at Hagaru, near the Changjin Reservoir, and Koto, 10 miles south, the steady push to safety continues. Chinese prisoners captured by patrols are carried along on the withdrawal for whatever information they may furnish G2. In contrast to the North Korean prisoners, these Chinese are much better equipped and more warmly clad. The Marines have a bitter march ahead. It's 44 miles to Hungnam. The road winds through some of the roughest fighting terrain in the world. In the history of the U.S. Marine Corps, this march will stand as one of its most valiant battles. Twisting, icy roads, snowstorms, below zero cold. General Winter is allied with the Chinese in this operation. While the convoys are moving east, rear guard units are still fighting to hold back the Chinese hordes near Hagaru. Many vehicles break down and are abandoned. The engineers work constantly to make the road passable. Bridges dropped by air are built ahead of the column. These desperately tired men inch their way along until they reach the little settlement of Koto. They join 3,000 more Marines, but there is little rest here. The Chinese wave is still sweeping down from the north, and a few hours' rest may mean annihilation. Mile by heartbreaking mile, each hour is endless. The cold numbs the mind to everything but the next turn in the road. Then slowly, these weary men realize there is less snow around them. They have reached the foot of the mountains. They are near the sea. 13 days after the march from Hagaru, the Marines meet the protection of the U.S. 3rd Division on the outskirts of Ham Hung.
For these troops who found the protection of the Hungnam beachhead, it was the end of one of the most harrowing experiences of the entire Korean conflict. And certainly, Chuck, one of the worst places was the Changjin Reservoir, isn't that right?
Yes, Captain, it was. I think most of the troops who were at the chosen reservoir will remember it as a day of nightmares. Our 31st Regiment was there, and the things they saw, they'll never forget. We had hundreds of thousands of Chinese attacking in waves, swarms, what came to be known later as a human sea type of attack. There were banzai attacks with blaring bugles in the dark of night, waving, rattling sabers. There was infiltration in camps, too, and that was pretty hair-raising.
And our casualties were pretty heavy at that time, Chuck, weren't they?
Yes, our casualties were heavy. But the enemy suffered a lot of casualties, too. You can't charge a whole battalion of men into one of our artillery positions when the guns are cut point blank, straight down, firing right into the troops. They lost a lot of men that way.
Well, how were we able to get our wounded out of there, Chuck?
Most of the wounded were evacuated by helicopter or light plane. The 7th Division's light aviation section worked day and night evacuating some of those men, and became the first such section in the Army ever to receive the Distinguished Unit Citation for its work at the chosen Changjin Reservoir.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, all these troops got back to the Hungnam beachhead, and how long a time was it from the time you left the Yalu until you got to Hungnam, Chuck?
Well, our 17th Regiment was still posted on the Yalu, and I left them a few days after Thanksgiving to join this 31st Regiment at the chosen reservoir. In the meantime, the pressure was so great on the 17th Regiment extended far to the north that they had to withdraw. And both the 17th Regiments and the 31st Regiments were safely inside the Hungnam perimeter sometime around December 10th.
Well, then you saw all the preparations going on for the great evacuation, right?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us a little about it, Chuck?
Well, we had the 3rd Division there, the Army's 3rd Division, our 7th Division, the 1st Marine Division, the ROK, Republic of Korea, Capital Division, and hundreds of thousands of North Korean civilians all jamming the port of Hungnam. these civilians wanted to leave. They wanted to go to South Korea. And we did load them on LSTs. Despite all these people there and more than 100,000 troops, the evacuation was orderly. We had landed in an amphibious invasion just about, well, a little more than a month before. So we pulled out in reverse. We did exactly the same thing, just opposite, and it worked out fine. Vehicles, men, and equipment.
Well, that was certainly a great concentration of people and equipment, Chuck.
It was.
Did we have a protection of artillery around this perimeter?
Well, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. The artillery protection, the plan was really something to see. As I said, that we had these 3 American divisions there. We had the United States Navy laying off the coast, including the big Missouri and several other heavy ships. Now, the plan was to have this whole Hungnam perimeter zeroed in, as they call it, in artillery range. With the Army artillery and the Navy big guns, the entire ring around Hungnam was spotted. Should the enemy attack in a mass wave or in a probing attack, the artillery would open up immediately, already registered in on their targets, and blast them. Should the enemy have launched a big attack to push us into the sea, well, our top generals there, I heard their estimates, they said the Chinese would have suffered one of the greatest military slaughters in history.
Well, now we have the concentration of troops and men, as we said. We have our protection. Let's watch the preparations for the evacuation of Hungnam.
At Hungnam, preparations are underway for the largest amphibious evacuation in military history. Everything of military value in the cities of Ham Hung and Hungnam is to be carried away or destroyed. Huge shipments of military equipment had poured into the area for weeks to supply the expected victory march to the Manchurian border. Now these supplies, sent here to support the whole 10th Corps, are piled up and carried out to the transports again. Headquarters equipment, rehabilitation supplies, everything goes as Korean civilians pitch in to help. Most of the Korean population is hoping there will be shipping space for them to go too. The vast quantity of equipment that is being moved here is more easily comprehended when you think of the units involved. The 10th Corps that is being evacuated includes 3 full U.S. divisions. The 1st Marine Division, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the 7th Infantry Division, plus thousands of South Korean troops. The personnel involved in this move is equal to the entire population of Dayton, Ohio. Over 100,000 civilian refugees from the Hungnam area are taken to freedom along with the troops, but thousands must be left behind to the uncertain mercy of the communists. The refugees pour down to the docks until every available ship is jammed. Their eagerness to abandon their homes and possessions is pitiful proof of their fear of the communist regime. These people, who have known red domination, give dramatic evidence that they have had enough. Every effort is made to evacuate as many as possible to the Pusan area. Pusan is already swarming with hundreds of thousands of refugees who have fled from other parts of Korea. This huge migration poses a major problem to UN authorities. Loaded down with their few belongings or a baby, the refugees push forward to the ships. The Hungnam evacuation entails the movement of 105,000 soldiers, 17,500 vehicles, and 350,000 tons of equipment. The communists, whose supply lines from Manchuria are under constant attack by our planes, will sorely miss this huge haul of military equipment which so nearly fell to them as a prize of war. Rear guard troops hold fast on the shrinking perimeter of the beachhead with the support of naval guns from the harbor. And this valuable materiel is saved for other battles. With the United States 3rd Division fighting the principal holding action, the rest of the 10th Corps is taken aboard the evacuation ships. The 3rd Division had been fighting to the south of the Marines in the original advance to the border. In spite of the apparent turmoil, the troop evacuation is calm and orderly. The removal of the wounded has first priority. Although the more serious cases have been loaded on earlier ships or taken out by air, casualties keep coming in from the defense perimeter. In spite of the fact that our forces are greatly outnumbered, the cost in casualties is much lighter than for a comparable time during the summer defense of the Pusan beachhead. Landing craft form an endless conveyor belt running from the docks to the transports waiting in the harbor. It takes a lot of boatloads to carry 100,000 soldiers. On hand to receive the 10th Corps troops is a large U.S. Navy amphibious fleet commanded by Rear Admiral Doyle. The guns of the 7th Fleet under Vice Admiral Struble support the evacuation. This redeployment of an entire Army Corps by sea has never been attempted before. But the U.S. forces, pioneers in mass beachhead operations, simply take their well-perfected amphibious landing techniques and work them in reverse. The evacuation begun on 12 December is well along by the 20th of the month. The gallant fighting force, which fought its way to the coast against tremendous odds, takes leave of Northern Korea. But the red aggressors will be meeting them again.
Those were the events that comprised the big picture between November 20th and December 20th, 1950. Our thanks to Sergeant Charles Dumas, combat correspondent of the Army 7th Division, for being with us. Next week, the big picture will bring into focus the destruction of the port of Hongnan, the evacuation of Seoul, an airstrike by our F-86 Sabre jets, and another report from one of our Korean veterans who saw, as it happened, a part of the big picture. This is Captain Carl Zimmerman saying, be with us then.